Thank you all so much for being here today and welcome to our webinar. We are very happy to see you all here, and our team is super excited to share research from our study about how community college students think about programs of study and potential careers and how they navigate what we all know is a really important decision. Before we get started today, a couple of notes. We will send around the recording in a couple days. We'll also send the slides and links to all the publications that we referenced today. If you have any questions as we're going along, you can feel free to put them in the chat. Our team will try to address some of them as we go, and we will also save some for our Q&A at the end. So again, welcome, and we are excited to dig in. I want to introduce our amazing team to start. Veronica Minaya, my colleague at CCRC, and Rachel Baker, who is a professor at the Penn Graduate School of Education. The three of us lead this project together, and we're just so thrilled to be joined by an amazing team that includes Serena Klumpin, CCRC Senior Research Associate, who is leading the qualitative work for this study, as well as Stephanie Aguilar Padilla and Patrick Levely Delgado, who are both PhD students at Penn, as well as Jeff Fletcher, who is a survey specialist and former community college student at the University of Michigan. Before we get started, we also just want to thank Sendium Education Group for supporting this research, as well as our college partners, and especially all of the students who participated in our study and participated in the student interviews. This work wouldn't be possible without them, so we are very, very grateful. Today, we're going to start by sharing a little background on our motivation for this study, and then I'll share some details about our data collection strategies. Next, we'll share 4 kind of high-level takeaways, findings that cut across our project, drawing from the student survey, interviews with faculty and staff, and interviews with students. Then I'm going to ask our colleague, Marissa Vernon-White from Lorain County Community College in Ohio, to share some about how the college is supporting student program onboarding. And then we'll end with a Q&A where you can ask questions of Marissa, you can ask questions of our team, and we will go from there. Our team brings a number of different perspectives to this project, including research experience looking at how community colleges prepare students to enter the labor market, issues of access and success in broad access institutions, including community colleges, how coaching and advising support student success, and research on guided pathways reforms. And all of this research, along with our work with community colleges, aligned around this big question about how students choose a program of study. While there's been some research on students' program choices in higher education, past research doesn't really provide a complete understanding of how students make this decision, how they weigh competing interests that they may have and pressures that they're feeling, how certain they are about their initial decision, and critically, how this choice evolves over time. Many colleges across the country are currently engaged in reimagining or rethinking onboarding experiences, or they're considering redoing onboarding with the goal of really helping students explore, choose, and gain momentum in a program of study. But one of the big missing links here is that without knowing how students make these decisions, it's really hard to design an onboarding experience that can address the needs of community college students and help them really find a path that is aligned with their interests and goals. So, students' choices, they really matter. And one of the most common questions that a new community college student is asked is probably, what's your major? And I'm sure that all of us can think back to when we were a college student making this choice and some of the things that we wrestled with, who we talked to, what we were hoping to learn in our chosen program, and what job we were thinking we might eventually get. But as we know from a growing body of research about the alignment between programs of study and students' post-graduation outcomes, employment opportunities, and earnings, these vary by field and by type of award, whether students get a certificate, an associate degree, an applied associate's, a bachelor's, and beyond. We also know that students are more likely to complete a credential if it's in a field that they are interested in and excited about. College can be really hard, and students, especially community college students, are balancing a lot of competing demands. So being motivated and inspired, and also being able to see how the program that you're in will help you achieve your long-term goals is really, really important to helping to keep students engaged and motivated and inspired. And then finally, we know from research we've been doing at CCRC that there are many community college students who end up in programs like liberal or general studies, a degree that is not grounded in a discipline, does not really prepare students for a good job, and isn't preparing students to transfer with junior standing in a major with no excess credits. So one question is, why do so many students end up in this degree? And is it kind of the new undecided for students who may be exploring? And what can we do to help students into a program of study that is actually more aligned with their interests and goals? When we kicked off this study in 2023, we were guided by a couple of big questions. One, how do students choose a program of study? And as part of that, what factors and influences shape this decision? And what are the institutional practices and resources, both people and programs within the institution, that are most helpful to students? And two, how do students' choices of programs change over time, and what informs these evolving decisions? We believe this isn't a one-time decision that students make when they're starting college, but we don't really know why they change their mind and what kind of factors into this decision. So next, I want to share a brief summary of our data collection strategies for this project, which featured a longitudinal student survey. So to administer our survey, we worked with 4 amazing community colleges across the country. These colleges were from 4 different states: California, Maryland, Ohio, and Texas, and they were quite diverse. So it included 2 HSIs, 1 predominantly Black institution, and also included 1 rural college, 1 urban institution, and 2 more suburban institutions. We administered the first wave of the survey to all first-time in college students in fall 2023. And we invited all 12,628 FTI students at these 4 colleges to take the survey, and a little more than 4,500 students completed it. So we had a response rate in wave 1 of 36%. We initiated the survey very early in the fall 2023 term. It was really within the first 2 to 3 weeks of classes starting, because we wanted to capture students' earliest thinking about programs and careers of interest. Next, we invited all 4515 students who completed wave 1 to take wave 2 in spring 2024, and then we had a response rate of 61%. And finally, those same group of students, the 4,515 students, were invited to complete the survey again in fall 2024, and we had a response rate there of 63%. We used a number of recruitment strategies for this survey, and across all 3 waves, we recruited students via email and text, and we offered tokens of appreciation for completing the survey. But I wanted to highlight a few strategies, a few additional strategies that we used in a couple waves of the survey. So one, in the first wave, we worked with the college's IR departments to identify classes that enrolled large numbers of FTI students. So this was a lot of like first year experience courses, English 101 classes, things like that. And we contacted the faculty in those classes and asked for permission for class time to introduce and administer the survey. So we put together a schedule for each one of the colleges, and we spent 2 to 3 days at each institution in fall 2023. And again, this was in the first 2 to 3 weeks of the fall term. In total, we visited 188 classes across the 4 colleges, and we estimate that between 23 and 29% of students who completed the first wave of the study did so because of our campus visits. And this was a really important strategy for us because we wanted to ensure a good response rate so that we would have enough students to continue in waves 2 and 3. And we also hoped that visiting the classes would result in a more representative sample than we might get from email and text alone. In wave two, we added in thank you notes. So right when we were opening wave two in spring 2024, we sent all students who completed wave one a thank you note that included a personalized QR code to the second wave of the survey, as well as a $5 prepayment that was in addition to the $40 that they got if they completed this survey. And we also did an experiment in wave two on reminder calling. So a couple weeks into the survey, we randomized students into a group that received up to 3 calls and a group that didn't receive calls. We did find that the calling was really effective. And so in wave 3, we again did the thank you note with the $5 prepayment, emails, text, but this time we called all students up to 6 times. I want to share just a little bit about the survey before we dig into the findings. Waves 1 to 3 included all the same questions in these 3 buckets. So we focused on students' educational and career goals, the programs that they are considering, and the factors that were really important to them when selecting a program of study. And we also had a series of questions about their experiences, both inside and outside of the college, that was informing their program choice. And most of these were the same across all the colleges. For the lists of programs we gave students, we did provide the students with a list of programs available at their college. So they would have been seeing the same list that they would have seen, for example, in their college catalog, or if they were filling out an application. The experiences were mostly the same. They varied slightly where we included specific programs or specific office names that students at the college would have been familiar with. Then in wave 3, we made a couple of additions. Again, this was in fall 2024. It was 1 year after the initial survey. And we included a series of questions about students' experiences with peers, with faculty and in courses, and with advising. And we also included questions for students who were no longer enrolled at their initial institution. So again, this was a year later, and we were curious about learning from students who had since left the institution, their reasons for leaving. And so we asked them a series of questions about that. We also gave them the questions on their experiences with peers, faculty, and advising. And we actually just published a paper last week on the reasons that students left college, and we'll make sure that that is in the chat for you. And then finally, we did a series of interviews in fall 2024 with faculty and staff across the 4 colleges. These were 1-hour Zoom interviews, and you can see here the list of people that we interviewed, but we really focused on folks who were interacting with new students, who were maybe talking to them about programs and careers and could share their insights on how students are making this decision. And then just this past summer, we did 42 interviews with students who completed all 3 waves of the survey. Again, these were 1-hour Zoom interviews. And these were students who took all 3 waves of the survey, but were taking the version of the survey for students who were still enrolled at their initial institution. All right, so I'm going to turn it over now to my colleagues Rachel and Vero, who are going to share some findings from our research.
Great, thank you, Hannah. So we're going to present on 4 broad buckets of findings, and I'll go through the first 2, and Vera will go through the second 2. And these are preliminary findings from wave 1 of our survey. So Hannah mentioned that we have 3 waves of our survey. We are still analyzing findings from waves 2 and 3 and from the administrative data, so we'll be focusing today on findings from the first wave of the survey. The first finding is that new students are considering multiple careers and programs of study when they enter college. So our survey asked students to identify up to 3 careers they were considering, and we gave them open text fields with the only limit being that they could describe a career in up to 4 words. And a little later in the survey, as Hannah mentioned, they were asked to select up to 3 programs of study that they were considering. And again, this was the full drop-down menu of programs available at their institution that they would have seen in the catalog or on the application. And we organized them. The only difference was that we organized them by type of credential, certificate, associates, and in the case of 2 schools, bachelor's degrees. And in both cases, students could list up to 3 careers or programs, but only needed to list 1. So on the next slide, we're going to show you the first basic question is how many careers were students considering? And so a reminder, these are first-time in college students, and they completed the survey within their first 2 months of enrollment. So first, we're going to look at careers. As you can see, 10% of students listed only one career, 14% of students listed 2 careers, 65% of students listed 3 careers, and you might notice that 9% of students listed 4 or more careers, but I told you we only had 3 slots. That's because a fair number of students would write more than one career in one space, so 9% of students did list 4 or more careers. So the big takeaway here is that 74% of students said that they were considering 3 or more careers upon college entry. On the next slide, we'll look at the number of programs that they identified. So we saw that 21% of students listed only one program, 15% said they were considering 2 programs, and 61% of students said they were considering 3 programs of study. So the obvious next question is, are students considering multiple careers or programs in the same or different fields, right? Are they listing 3 very similar programs or 3 really different programs? So to do this, we coded students' responses, career responses using ONET codes, and program choices we coded using SIP codes. After we coded all the career responses, we looked at the distribution of each student's response at the 2-digit ONET level. And 2-digit is a really broad level. This is kind of the highest level, and it includes a field like healthcare or computer and mathematical occupations. On the next slide, I'll show you what we found in terms of the distributions of students' interests. 38% of students said that they were listed careers in the same career field. 44% of students listed careers in 2 different career clusters. And again, these are the 2-digit ONET codes, so these represent really different types of careers. And 18% of students listed careers in 3 different career clusters, again, 2-digit ONET codes. So 62% of students in our sample were considering careers in 2 or 3 career clusters. Next slide. Here we look at students' first choice of career by cluster, and these are the top 10 career clusters. So we asked them to order of the 3 or 4 that they wrote down, the order of preference, and this chart shows a distribution of students' first choice career. Not very surprising, we see that more than 1/3 of students' first choice career was in the healthcare field, followed by 13% of students interested in a business occupation, and 10% of students interested in a career in computer or mathematical fields. Next slide, please. Now we look at students, the distribution of students' programs that they are considering. And again, we find the students are considering programs in different fields. So we organized all programs by SIP codes, and here we're looking at the distribution across 2-digit SIP codes. So again, these are very broad fields. 34% of students listed programs in one cluster, 43% in 2, and 23% of students in 2 different program clusters. So 2/3 of students said that they were considering programs in at least 2 different program clusters. On the next slide, we look at students' first choice programs of study by cluster. If you remember the list from the top 10 careers, you'll notice that the top 3 are the same, and they're in the same order: healthcare, business, and computer fields. We're not going to talk about this today, but we did look at to see if students listed similar fields for both careers and programs, and we found that there's really strong alignment. So students who said they were considering careers in health professions listed programs in health professions by and large. So I mentioned earlier that we coded student career responses to ONET codes. We ended up with about 12,000 individual career responses across our 4,500 students. The career clusters that we showed earlier were based on 2-digit ONET codes, which are the broadest. 4-digit and 6-digit ONET codes get more specific, and 8-digit ONET codes are the most specific and represent very specific career interests. So in coding up their responses, we're able to see whether they were listing broad career fields of interest or very specific careers. We found on the next slide that 88% of all our career responses we were able to code to an 8-digit ONET code, indicating that most students had very specific careers in mind. Students weren't saying that they were interested in healthcare or in education, which would both be 2-digit ONET codes. They were saying that they wanted to be a NICU nurse or an 8th grade social studies teacher, both of which are 8-digit ONET codes. So taken together, looking at both careers and programs, this tells us that students at our colleges were considering a number of different pathways upon college entry. And this raises questions about whether colleges are capturing students' broad and diverse interests on their college application or in their early advising. Next, I'm going to talk about our second finding. And we asked students about how they think about choosing a program and a career. We find that between the survey and interviews, students are balancing multiple pressures when choosing a program, but labor market opportunities are top of mind. Before we asked students to choose a program on the survey, or to indicate which programs they were considering, we asked them about the factors that were important to them in considering a program. And we group these factors into 4 big buckets. First, self-appraisal of ability, skills, and curricular knowledge related to the program. Second, having family or friends in the program or career field, or wanting to make family happy. 3, program fit and enjoyment. And 4, the program's perceived labor market and earnings prospects. Each of these categories included 4 or 5 specific factors. For example, the 5 factors of the labor market and earnings category included making a good salary, finding a job easily after graduation, having a good work-life balance. For each of these individual factors, we asked students to say how important the factors were to informing their program choice, from not at all important to completely important. We found that all 4 areas were important to students. Across all 4 areas, at least half of students said that it was mostly or completely important to choosing the program. So students are balancing a number of factors when making the decision. But we found that labor market opportunities and future earnings drove the decision for many students, with 92% of students saying that that was mostly or completely important to them as they make the decision. We balanced this information from students with asking faculty and staff at each of the schools about their perception of how students choose programs of study. And they noted a number of themes, some of which align with what students said and some of which offer a different perspective. First, students thought that interviewees, faculty and staff, thought that some students were not aware of many options for different careers and may only consider fields that are familiar either from the media or from having family in that field. One faculty member noted that this may limit students to a set of options that don't fully reflect their own interests and skills. If you remember in our survey, we only asked students about the programs and careers they were considering, and we didn't ask them which ones they had ruled out, which is an important kind of other side of the story for students. Second, faculty and staff noted that the negative perceptions of a field may deter students from considering jobs that provide a promising pathway. One example was an administrator at one college who highlighted that manufacturing was a field in which the college was struggling to engage students, even though there are good jobs, because of past perceptions. Third, many faculty and staff noted a misalignment between family expectations and students' personal interests. Faculty and staff observed that family expectations play a significant role in shaping students' choices, sometimes in ways that may not align with students' interests or strengths. Multiple advisors and instructors report that it's not uncommon for students to choose programs in areas such as healthcare or business because these are seen as safe choices, despite not always aligning with the student's own interests. And finally, faculty and staff know that some students face a limited set of program choices from the beginning due to financial considerations. Students from low-income backgrounds may feel compelled to select programs that promise quick employment or high wages, even if they don't align with their interests or skills. Vera is going to talk about our third finding.
Our third main takeaway regards the certainty students feel about their programs of interest. In our survey, after we asked the students to rank the programs they were considering, we asked them how certain they felt that they would end up choosing what they identify as their first choice. The students report high levels of confidence in their choices, but that confidence can mask ongoing questioning and curiosity about other programs and career directions. Next. Students were very certain that they would choose their first choice program. 84% of students, 53 very certain, and another 31 somewhat certain, told us they were confident about their first choice program. This was very surprising to us for a number of reasons. First, we know from previous research that many students end up changing their major. Second, while students express high levels of certainty, students also identified multiple programs and careers of interest in different fields or clusters. 75% were considering 3 or more careers, and 61% were considering 3 programs of study. Third, We heard in our interviews with faculty and staff that students had low awareness of a range of career options and weren't very certain about their choices. We are still digging into the survey data, but even the early results are telling us surprising findings. Program choice is not a one and done decision, even for students who say they are sure about their initial choices. When students come in not confident about their first initial choice, they are especially likely to move around. About 3 out of 4 of those students change programs in their first year of enrollment, and more than half end up in a very different field or cluster. But even the confident students are not locked in. Among students who told us they felt confident at the start, about 59% still changed their programs in their first year. And roughly a third move into a completely different broad field or cluster. So the message here is students are still telling us that they are certain, but underneath that, there's still a lot of ongoing exploration and resorting. Next slide. And we are seeing the same thing in our qualitative work. As a reminder, we interviewed 42 students almost 2 years after they initially took the survey. By this point, 21 students ended up changing their program. Of these, 18 switched to a different field. One of the things we talked to students about was why they either switch or stayed in the same program. And among those who did change programs, many said they switched after learning more about the program or the field of study. Often by taking classes, discovering what the field is actually like, and understanding what kind of jobs it leads to, and what they could expect to earn. Students also changed programs when they weren't accepted into limited access programs or when they learned that their program wouldn't transfer. Among students who didn't change programs, they often describe having a strong interest in their field and being able to see a clear career path. Among those who participated in the interviews, taking major related classes early on helped confirm that they were in the right place and reinforce their choices. Next, please. Now we're going to talk about finding number 4. Finally, we found through our interviews that there are many opportunities for colleges to increase the students' use of resources and other college supports to help facilitate their program and career exploration. Based on what we heard from faculty and staff, many students are not fully using the advising, workshops, and other tools that are already available to them. Next slide, please. In our interviews with faculty and staff, we talk about many supports that can help the students choose a program. We group these supports into 3 broad types. The first one being information exposure, which would include program and career events, basically ways to give students information about different career paths and programs at their college. The second, interactive exploration, including online tools, student success courses, advising, and career services. These supports involve interaction with college staff, faculty, and advisors at the college who can have conversations with students. And the third, direct experience includes work-based learning. This was actually identified as the best way of helping students explore their interests and learn more about different fields. But as we know, it's also the most challenging to provide at scale. Next slide, please. So after grouping supports into these 3 broad types, we then ask faculty, staff, and advisors which ones they see as most impactful for helping students actually explore and choose a program of study. Across the interviews, they kept coming back to more interactive and hands-on forms of exploration. They highlighted 5 main types of support. one-to-one advising, career exploration that is built into the first year experience courses, opportunities to take inspiring classes in a field of interest early on, making connections with faculty who can help students understand what a field is really like and what they'll learn. And finally, exploration learning, getting to try on a field through real world experiences. We see clear connections between what faculty and staff describe and what the students told us during the interviews. In our 42 student interviews, students repeatedly emphasized that taking classes in a field of interest and learning more about what that field was actually like were the key reasons they either confirmed their program choice or decided to switch. So we also ask similar questions in our student survey, so we can track if the students are actually accessing these supports over time and how those experiences are shaping their program choices. We're still analyzing those data, so stay tuned for more on that piece. I'm going to pass it back to Hannah.
All right. Thank you, Vero. Thanks, Rachel. I am really thrilled to welcome our friend, Marissa Vernon-White, who is the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Services at Lorain County Community College in Ohio. And she is going to share a little bit today about how Lorain is helping students choose programs and careers. So Marissa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Hannah. You can go ahead and advance straight to the next slide. So first, to understand how we're using some of this information to advance our work with students, you have to understand where we've been. So LCCC gets a lot of questions, comments, and a lot of recognition nationally for a program that we launched in 2021 known as Career by Design. This was really our first attempt to take labor market information and put it in the hands of advisors and career counselors. And from there, it really started to kind of shape the way that we're working with students across different experiences at the college. After we had that professional development series in 2021, which was with one of our economic development partners, the team quickly realized that we needed to have an ongoing dialogue about when and where and how students were making decisions about their careers, not just the program of study, but then also all of the decisions that come after that, like transfer and work-based learning and internships and where specifically they're going to work within certain industries. So in 2022, we adopted a set of guiding principles to really keep us focused on our vision for making sure that all students have the information that they need, the social networks that they need, and that they have all of the experiences that are necessary to really make an informed decision about what their future looks like. So I share this with you because it kind of tees up some of the conversation that I'll share with you here in a moment about how we've used these results and how we're processing them, which I think provides a really good practitioner lens in terms of the research that CCRC has done, but ways that you can then take this back to your colleges and begin to actually use it to shape the way that you work with students. You can go to the next slide, Hannah. So part of the reason why I wanted to share that about Career by Design initially is because this is a college-wide committee now coming off of our work in 2021, where we really realized that we needed to do more to link students to some of the workforce needs that we have in the Northeast Ohio region. And so because of that, we actually have a standing committee here at the college that accompanies much of our student success work that is known as the Career by Design Committee. So this is a cross-functional group of faculty, staff, and we also have student representatives on it from our student leadership, student senate. But this is something that all colleges can do in some way, shape, or form. So most of us have student success councils or some type of body that works with student success. And this can be part of what gets integrated into that particular body of work at your institution and really starting to shift through and focus more on post-graduation outcomes and completion. So when we first got these findings from CCRC, this fits into kind of a larger strategy at the college where all of our committees, specifically Career by Design, but also those that focus on enrollment, those that focus on student success, completion, teaching and learning, we use literature reviews and pieces of research like what CCRC just put out at the beginning of all of our meetings to kind of get started with conversation, and also to make sure that we're always scanning external environments and research that informs our work. One of the things that Vero shared was the understanding of the 3 categories of services and programs. And this is one of the things that I think came out of the CCRC study that is really applicable to all of the work that we do, is being able to kind of classify, what do you mean by career experiences? One of the things that our CCRC colleagues noted is that advisors, career counselors, and to some extent faculty, depending on the role, have direct responsibility for working with students on career alignment. However, it can sometimes be challenging to, and even overwhelming, to think about how that can be infused across your entire institution. And so we started really leaning into that classification of the informative, the interactive, and the direct experiences to make sure that students have access to each of those throughout the entire continuum of their college experience. So that's been really great language for us to think about, not just having just the work-based learning experiences, but also, do we have enough that are informative, or places where students can experiment, or where they can interact with some of their results when they take career assessments and so forth. We also thought that it was really interesting, and talked extensively about this, some of the perceptions and the gaps that exist between what we think students are experiencing versus what they are actually experiencing. One of the things that came up for us in this study was the fact that students are getting maybe a little bit of pressure to go to college, and that is certainly that the family is a really big factor in terms of students deciding to pursue higher education, but that when it comes to the career choice, faculty and staff believe that that is happening potentially more often than when students are actually experiencing it, which I think really opens up a door for us to come in and alongside of students to make sure that they have the information they need. We also provided and talked through a snapshot of the findings across the 3 distinct areas, just because that way, taking a study like this, we were able to distill it down and really pull out the highest levels and have conversation around things like education and career goals, and do those match decision making that students are going through, and then how they're choosing their programs, and does it actually align to the career that they want to go into. So that's how we took a major study like this and really broke it down to focus on some of the high level findings and move it into action research. Let me take the next slide. So these are some of the takeaways from that discussion when we had that that collaborative literature review conversation in Career by Design, which actually was earlier this year in September. One of the things that we kind of had an aha moment about this, and I think sometimes in community colleges, we're really focused on making sure that we have systems and processes to identify the students who need us most. And one of the traps that we can certainly fall into is this dichotomy between the decided and the undecided student. Which is probably not nuanced enough to account for exactly how students are thinking about majors and careers. So when you have a student's major listed in your student information system, or the advisor's aware of it, that does not necessarily mean that that student is decided. In fact, the study really shows the fact that students are considering multiple degree programs, multiple careers, and sometimes even across different clusters or areas, which really starts to influence the way that we have advising conversations, because students are essentially all undecided in many ways because they're still exploring throughout the continuum of their experience. We also say, or one of the things that we also noticed was that the students said that they had what they needed to be able to make a decision. And we want to trust that students believe that they do have what they need, but we also know that that may not be true, that they may be looking at just the individuals who are around them, listening to friends, family, faculty members, and others, but not necessarily always looking at the data or thinking about whether or not it's the best fit for them. So we found ourselves really challenging that students say they have what they need to make an informed decision and to move towards certainty about their career, but how could they possibly have all of that? Because even we don't have that as professionals sometimes directly at our fingertips as it relates to things like labor market or the nuance of actually building a career in some industries. We also talked about the fact that conversations about career and program choice should really include the why. Why are students selecting what they're selecting? If they tell us that they're certain or they're uncertain, digging into that more. And that really speaks to a lot of the capacity that many of our institutions are trying to develop around advising and career counseling to make space for some of those conversations. The other thing that came from our conversation is that individuals who don't necessarily work directly in career or advising capacities really felt like, this is something that our entire institution can really wrap our arms around. So further integration of things like academic and career focused service areas, but into other spaces on campus, like student employment, work-based learning, even things like financial aid, and really thinking through how that plays into a student's career decision-making and mapping. So one of the conversations that we had coming off of this is how do we gain capacity for a college-wide approach to career development? And you can go to the next slide. So lastly, I wanted to share with everybody that we had asked during that committee meeting back in September just to reflect on this. And again, these are individuals who are engaged in a committee directly focused on working with students in shaping our institution to be really career-centered. And so we asked them to put down on note cards, what are the things that they hope to gain this year? So in other words, you can read this as, what do you need to be able to help students make decisions about their career or to be part of this career ecosystem here at our college? The responses when we took those back in, and again, this is across probably 40 to 50 individuals across campus in various roles, we were able to break those down into 4 different categories of needs and knowledge that people felt like they needed to really support students well. The first one is really thinking about understanding student needs and their readiness, and being able to understand what it means to be certain versus not certain and why students are making the decision that they are. So hearing that student voice and making space for conversations, even in places where it's not intentionally designed to be there. So making the space for other staff who work outside of advising and career to engage with students and ask what it is they're looking at doing and what they might be interested in doing in the future. We also talked about being really proactive through some of our systems and processes to make things really inevitable for students, because we realize that we have to gain capacity to reach all students across the entire continuum. We can't take for granted the fact that a student says that they're in a major, that they are in fact maybe still uncertain about that, or that they may have doubts about that. And so how do we kind of string together all of these different things so that students are having multiple checkpoints through multiple perspectives to be able to really shape what they want their career to look like in the future? We also continue to talk here at the college and hear from faculty and staff that they really want strong tools that are going to inform the way that they guide students. So labor market data is incredibly important. Creative messaging. We know in our area, for example, that manufacturing is probably the best bet for a student to really build a thriving wage. But yet, how do we talk to students about that? And how do we stay on top of the trends that are actually impacting that industry to be able to broaden our notion of who should be going into that field and who has the ability to do so? And then the last thing is this really brought to light for certain individuals when we asked them what they need specifically to support students is stronger connection to the student opportunities, which then several months out from this conversation is now really driving a need to go back to some of our job placement processes and our our career exploration processes, so that we have even stronger integration between career services, advising, work-based learning, and the faculty who are working with students. So that's really been a big focus of our work this fall, is really illuminating the fact that we need to have stronger connections between our employers and our students when they come to make that decision about what they want to go into. So that's just a little bit in a nutshell of how we took this survey back in September, took these results and how we processed them, and some of the things that came out of our conversation on the practitioner side, looking at the data, looking at the study, and how it can inform our work moving forward.
Thank you, Marissa. I want to just ask a couple of follow-up questions, and one of them really has to do with what is in the a question that came up in the chat. And one of the big things that we've been thinking about and then talking about, these findings keep on coming up, is this question of certainty. And, students are identifying careers with, that we can code to the 8-digit ONIT code. So they're identifying very specific careers. They're also identifying careers and programs in multiple very different fields. They're saying they're very certain. And we also know that a lot of students change their program. So I'm wondering like what you think is factoring into this certainty that students are talking about, and how as practitioners, like what does that mean for like, early advising conversations, and how do we kind of unpack that without just like you were saying, like just assuming, oh, okay, well, you're decided.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think asking students the why and asking some of these follow-up questions is really important. I'll actually share two kind of on-the-ground examples. One is from about a year ago, and one is actually just from this past week. One of them, this was from about a year or so ago. I had a student who was this was a student that we had on a panel in one of our committees. And on paper, her major was medical assisting. And so one would look at that and say, okay, well, this is somebody who wants to go into healthcare and is on that pathway to, maybe become a nurse or, something like that. In conversations with that student, what individuals came to realize is that that student actually has, it's a single parent who has 4 children and was looking to do a short-term program on the way to becoming a clinical psychologist. That would have never shown up in the data, right? So the student is saying, I want to go into medical assisting, but, and I'm certain about that. That is what I'm going to do. But the reason why I'm doing that right now is so that I can get a job and then I can continue my education because I want to go to graduate school. I just had another example of this just this past week. We had a scholarship luncheon or a scholarship dinner, and spotlighted a student who I personally know from a few semesters ago, I know that this student wants to be a scientific researcher. It's her goal to get a PhD, and I know that she really loves working in a lab. However, when we saw this student at the scholarship dinner, this student is now in the nursing program. And you may think, well, that's so interesting. You were on this STEM pathway, but now you're in nursing, right? That student, in conversation with her, has not lost at all the certainty about getting a PhD and working in a lab. But that student also realized that she may be in school for quite some time and views nursing as the thing to do for a stable income while continuing her education over time and working in healthcare research. So I think our students' stories they're so much more nuanced than what you can see in a student information system and when you sit down with them as an advisor. And asking these questions about why and what makes you certain about that and what else are you considering or how does this fit into your life or your future plans is a really important conversation to have, especially because there may be these kind of interim steps along pathways that might be really beneficial to students, especially those that have career goals that may take them much longer to get through school, but there may be different pathways to get them there and also make sure that they're making money along the way too.
One other thing I'm wondering about is this interest, students are thinking about jobs that they're going to get and how much money they might eventually make. But so how do you help students navigate that conversation without overloading them with like labor market data and, having, the time to like, talk to them about that type of thing?
So the labor market data conversation has been a really interesting one. That actually goes back to the work that we did in 2021, which was to kind of peel back and really look at the labor market as advisors and individuals who work in higher education and learn more about it. So we actually took the time to learn about it without students as part of that process. And I think that was really important because our advisors, who many of you may oversee advisors or are advisors yourselves, they don't always get to get up and go explore, right? Because they're seeing students all the time. And so Career by Design was really an initiative to bring our economic development and workforce partners information directly to those who work with students, which was our advisors, our outreach team, and our career team, to really learn that and then also to kind of practice and try on for size what it means to talk about that in student-friendly language. So we don't necessarily hit students right over the head with things like SOC codes and living wage and, SIP codes and major industries. But what we do, and this was kind of our evolution over time, was we really try to put in front of all students in their advising conversations the fact that, okay, 90% of our students we know are going to live here in Northeast Ohio. What we've learned about Northeast Ohio is that your best bet to really build a really strong, stable career is going to be in healthcare, manufacturing, information, and financials. So first of all, do any of those interest you, right? And that allows for some of those myths to come up. And then we also add in some of the pieces that have been longstanding here in terms of caseload advising, which asks about the student's current situation. We really get to know our students, and they're all assigned advisors. So the story begins to come out over time about how many children that student has, what some of their current challenges are, how much of a hurry they're in to make money versus what amount of time do you have to spend on education. And kind of being able to knit all of those things together makes for a really student-friendly way to come at, quote, labor market without actually, overwhelming them with figures and data and charts and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So we have a couple more minutes. I know there were some great questions in the chat, and we are responding to those. Let me just, Marissa, ask you, one more question before we kind of wrap up here today. But I guess, you talked a little bit about like whether you were surprised by some of these findings. I'm curious, like, what other questions some of this has raised for you? Like, if you were, to say, like, oh, could you guys dig into this? Like, what other questions was this, did these initial papers raise for you and the team?
Some of them I mentioned before, but I want to go back to them, which is, thinking through some of the responses about students feeling like they have the information that they need to make informed decisions. I think it's important to look at, like, what are students actually looking at? Because like I said, we all work in higher education, and we can hardly stay on top of what the labor market trends look like and what are valuable programs and so forth. So I think that's a really important one is, students say that they're looking at the labor market, but is it data informed, or is it more kind of myths that are being perpetuated throughout different communities about what different jobs look like and how are they known to be stable versus others? I also think it's really interesting in all the data in both asking students about like the program of study that they're in, and then also the students who are in general studies. I find it interesting that healthcare and business rise to the top in both, and yet those are such broad categories, which also kind of begs the question, when a student says, I'm very confident I want to do business, what specifically do they mean by that? I think business is a really interesting industry to kind of unpack what students mean by that and what they think that is. We've had some conversations here in Lorain County with our economic development partner, Team NEO, about what that looks like. And when students get a business degree or a management degree, what is in that? And how do they progress in the marketplace? Because something like management is often the default, because students have the assumption, and to some extent advisors even, that includes all facets of business, so it's well-rounded. But in reality, many students won't be able to get a, quote, management job unless they've actually worked in industry. And so kind of unpacking what students mean by some of these broader categories that they feel like they want to pursue, and then making sure that our academic programs are actually aligning to that. So I think digging in a little bit more to how students are, what information they're looking at, and what is their understanding of some of these fields that led them to that is really an interesting kind of offshoot of this research.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Marissa. I really appreciate you joining us today and sharing more about the work that you all are doing at Lorain. I'm going to just quickly wrap up here. I saw one question in the chat that I want to just quickly address, having to do with scheduling practices. And this is a really important question, and actually something that our team, including Vera, Rachel, Serena, and I, are going to be digging into in the future, because we're very interested in questions about course availability and scheduling, and both how that impacts students' ability to be able to progress in their programs of study, and how it might also be informing their program choices. So more to come on that. And we actually were able to include a couple questions on scheduling in the third wave of the study, which we're analyzing now. So more to come on that very shortly, which we are excited about digging into. So I just want to highlight a couple key takeaways from our research, which I think we've mentioned several times now, but one of the biggest takeaways is that students are entering college with a lot of different interests. And so the question, I think, from the college perspective is your college capturing the range of students' interests? And our exploratory students being defaulted into programs like liberal or general studies. So, if students are coming in with interests, who's asking them what this range is, or are we just kind of capturing what's on the application or in an advising appointment, which we know is, can be very, very rushed, especially before the start of the term. Like, how much are we able to dig into this? And if not, then how could we during the student's first term? A second big takeaway is this question of certainty. And I think there's a lot to unpack here, but at what point is anyone asking students about the different programs they're considering? And does this conversation really allow for uncertainty and exploration? Because we want to ensure that this, idea of onboarding students is really a process that occurs throughout students' first year of college. We know that they're going to change their mind, but this really needs to be, we think, like a facilitated process. And then so many factors are playing into students' program choices. And so how is your college helping students to really untangle and think about this complex choice? So what's next for us? We're going to be analyzing data from fall 23 survey through the fall 2024 survey to examine how students' program and career choices evolve and what factors are contributing to these changes. And we're very excited that we are going to be able to continue this study, and we're going to be administering a fourth and fifth waves of the survey in spring 26 and spring 2027. And at this point, students are going to be on multiple different paths. So we're including sections of the survey for students who have transferred, students who graduated and are working, and students who have left higher education altogether. And then finally, just please be in touch with us. This research is raising a lot of questions for us. We're still digging into it. So if there's things that this is raising for you, questions that you have, please reach out to us. I have our emails on the next slide. We're very curious what you think and what your takeaways are. And our colleague Caitlin is putting a bunch of papers in the chat. We've released 4 papers from this project so far. The first one is focused on a lot of what we shared today from students, the first wave of their survey when they were first entering in college in fall 23, a paper focused on the faculty and staff interviews. And just last week, we released this paper about why students are leaving higher education. And just today, hot off the press, we released a paper based on the student interviews that we did. So all of those are in the chat. And again, in a couple of days, we're going to be sending out a recording of this webinar, the slides, all the papers, and some other opportunities for you to join other CCRC events. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for your questions. Please send us an email if you have any additional thoughts. And thank you for being here. Have a great afternoon.